This is going to be first video of a playlist that is complete web pen testing, and we'll start from very basics, trying to understand web browsers, clients, servers, web servers, etc. We'll also learn what burp suite is, because a lot of people don't actually have any idea regarding what burp suite is, or what a local proxy is, what is Zap. So after I created the video with turbo intruder and race condition, a lot of people requested me to create a basic video. So I decided, let's create a playlist that will contain everything from basics to advanced web pen testing. Let's get started. I've created this screenshot for you. This is browser. You can call this a client. So what is a client? Anything that is making a request to some other machine or a server, like any IP address, that can be termed as client. For web client, the requirement is that the client should make HTTP request, right? So HTTP, if you guys don't know, it's a hypertext transfer protocol, and so currently we are at HTTP 2, and it's not mass adopted, but yeah, it's happening. So HTTP is just a protocol in which web browsers communicate with web servers, right? So what's a web server? Web server is basically serving files to a client, that is web browser. So if you open your web browser, you're probably viewing this video, for example, on an Android application. So here Android application is acting as a client, and a web server or a server is serving these videos to you, right? If you're watching this video from a web browser, same thing is happening. Web browser is acting as a client. It's sending the request, the web server is sending the data, and you're getting video. You are able to see this video through response, and that's how TCP packets are communicating, right? Either you're watching this on web browser or web servers. Now if we go look at this diagram, if we look at this screenshot, this is complete web server, and it contains front end. So for example, if you go and type youtube.com, right, so what you'll see is, like, on web browsers can only display client-side code, right? That server sends in the response. So what the server is doing is, like, if you search something on Google, like if you search Ninat on Google, or if you search test on Google, the server will send a response to the web browser, and the web browser here is a client. And if you look at this screenshot, like, web server contains front end, that is HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and it contains backend database, PHP, Python, Ruby, ASPX, these kind of languages. So when a browser, that is a client, like when a web client sends an HTTP request to the server receives that request, the server processes that request, like depending on what kind of code it's using on the backend. It may or may not, like, some servers are also called as front-end servers, so they directly serve the HTML or like static content to the client, and some servers are processing those HTTP requests, doing something and giving an output, like sending the HTTP response, right? So for example, if you directly hit Google, first you'll be greeted with a static HTML and CSS files, right? You'll see the search bar on Google. But if you enter test on Google, so what will happen next is you'll be redirected, like, to the search results. So what's happening there is, like, Google is searching into its own database, whatever it's using, and then giving you the search results. So that's the backend that's being functioning, right? So this app is possible because of the backend. Now I'll just show you an example of a front-end server to understand the differences more clearly. So inside my machine, I've created a directory known as my server, and I've pasted a HTML file, that is test.html, cat-test.html. So this is the content of the file, right? H1 testing client-side code. Now what we'll do is we'll run a Python server that will just serve this file. So that will work as a front-end server. That will not process anything, that will not take user input, that server doesn't have a database or anything. So let's see. To run a front-end server just to serve static files, you can type python 3 -n http.server. So yeah, our server is running on port 8000 right now. So let's see, let's send a request to this port. This is the URL, right? So we are running on localhost colon 8000, and this is what we get, right? Because we have a front-end server running, it's just directly showing us that this is the static file that is there, and the server is not doing anything except serving the files. It's just serving you the files. There is absolutely nothing happening on the backend. There is no server-side language. Nothing is running. So after visiting here, I can see that there is test.html. This is Python HTTP server, so it's a very simple server. When sent through browser, I send these requests, right? So there are total 2 HTTP requests that were sent. If you look clearly, so get HTTP1, get /HTTP1. This was the first request. The server responded with 200. Then the server responded file not found on this request, right? Favicon ICO. Cool. So once I click test.html, I can see that the HTML gets executed on my browser. So this is executing on the client side, right? Now, as you can see, like HTML is correctly executing. We are testing the client side code here. Cool. So this is all client side. Now we'll see what actually is happening, what kind of request our web browser, that is this Chrome browser, is basically sending. So for that, we'll use Burp Suite. What Burp Suite or Zap Proxy is, these are basically some softwares that run local proxy on the browser on your machine, so that you can intercept the client requests that are being sent. So if we look at our screenshot again, like for example, if we look at our screenshot, like how this is working, so the browser is sending HTTP request, right? So what Burp Suite is basically doing, or like Zap Proxy basically does, is like it runs a local server, local proxy server, and your browser, when it makes the request through that server, you are able to see what kind of request is going through and what kind of response is coming back before the browser executes it. So this is executed, right? Because we entered, if you remember the file correctly, we entered h1, so we entered HTML tag here. But because it's a browser, so what browser does is browser executes client-side code if the server sends it. And that's how you see different kind of styles, different kind of websites, some big text, some styling going on the websites. So let's see what kind of request our browser is actually making. So I'll just open Burp Suite, and then I'll use dashboard and proxy intercept. So Burp Suite also have its own browser. So now in this browser, every request that is going out will be using a proxy, and through that proxy you will be able to intercept the request and the response. So as you can see, when I visited this website, it says there are 2 requests that were sent. One is this get /test.html, and this was the response. Now the reason Burp Suite or any local proxy is used during a web pen test is you can turn the intercept on. If you refresh the web browser, you are able to observe that the request is not being sent, right? So that's the main thing. Like the request is not being sent here, and you can edit it. So like get test.html, you can change anything in the request. And that's how you inject your payloads and stuff, by intercepting your request, and you can forward it, right? So right now I didn't change anything, but yeah. So you got here localhost test.html saying not modified, and like this is the raw response, right? These are the response headers. This is the whole request. And through Burp Suite, I can also use repeater. I can send the request to repeater and get the response every time I want. So right now it's saying 304 not modified. That is happening because of the cache, right? So I can use it $cache equals to bus. You don't need to worry about that. This is not something that you need to be worried about. So now if you use this and if you send the request, like you can send the request to repeater and you can get a response here. So that's why this is basically used. Burp suite is used so much for web pen testing. So today we covered what a web server is. Web server is anything, any software, any service that uses HTTP protocol. What server side and backend code is. So server side or backend code is anything that runs on the server side, for example PHP, or like Node.js, for example PHP, Python, Ruby on Rails. So I'll just give you another example. If using this Burp Suite browser, we open Google, right? We open Google and let me turn the intercept off. So as you can see, we send so many requests to Google, and that's just because of the client side. Like client side is loading different kind of files, and so we are getting these files, right? Right now we just sent a get request. There is no server side code being sent, right? But now I want you to see, like if you enter testing here, right? And if you press enter and see the Burp Suite logs. So what's happening is, what Google is doing is it's communicating back on the backend with its database and searching for this keyword and then sharing us the results that it had for testing. So for this, backend code is used, right? So this is server side, and this is the example of client side, right? It's just giving me this output, like it's just on the front end and it's just on the browser basically. And here we are communicating with the server by sending a request. On this also we are communicating with the server, but it's not running any code on the server side. It's not processing our input. And here Google is processing our input. It's taking our keyword and then searching on the database, and then on the basis of their results, it's showing us the results. So here, of course, server-side language is used, and that's pretty much it for server-side and backend front code. We learned about client-side front-end code. Now, client-side vulnerabilities, right? And server-side vulnerabilities. So, client-side vulnerabilities are anything that exploits a web browser can be called as client-side vulnerability. So anything that exploits a web browser or a web client can be called as client-side vulnerability, or just a client can be called as client-side vulnerability. The examples of this will be, we are going to learn this in the next video. So example of this can be XSS, CSRF, and anything that requires us to exploit a web browser, right? So server-side vulnerabilities. Now anything that exploits the server directly, here you don't need to exploit a victim's browser, right? You're just targeting the server directly. For example, if Google is running here, and so if Google is processing our input on the server side, we can try to inject various characters here. We can try to do SQL injection, SSRF. These are some examples of the vulnerabilities that are of server side. So I'll write the definition here as well. Anything that exploits the server or targets server side code, right? So if the server is processing our input, then the chances are there can be server side vulnerabilities, right? But if the server is not processing our input in any way, then there can be no server-side vulnerabilities that you can possibly find. Yeah, that's pretty much it for server-side vulnerabilities. Some examples of server-side vulnerabilities are SQL injection, SSRF, RCE, LFI, etc. Like there are tons of server-side vulnerabilities. Burp Suite. in a nutshell, burpsuit is basically just a local proxy. So I created this screenshot so you guys can have good understanding. I'll edit this screenshot here basically. Let's just see. So the browser is making a request. What is burpsuit? Like, to understand burpsuit more clearly, we can use this. And imagine this green thing as a net. So local proxy that intercepts client and server side requests so that you can edit the requests / responses. So you can edit and intercept the requests. Web browser, client and web server communication, right? So imagine this as a net. Now this request is going, it's going through this, right? It's running local proxy, and that's what pretty much burpsuit, Zap proxy, or any other tool that is used for like pen testing web applications is. So you must have heard like people are constantly talking about burpsuit. So yeah, burpsuit runs a local proxy. So this is pretty much it.
So if you like this video, subscribe to my channel.